Listen, it can be difficult to put a price tag on doing what you love for a living. And I've made every mistake a young artist can make. But I've been around the block a few times, so let me help you figure out how much to charge for your art. Because here's the thing, with this job, it's just a matter of time before you get
fumble a bag. Now I will not fumble a bag. Fumble a bag. Now I will not fumble a bag. Act like you know how this goes.
I rarely introduce myself in these videos, so I figured now would be a good time to start. That's me, walking in cool slow motion. 22, 23-ish years in the industry as an artist and sometimes writer. If this is your first time here, nice to meet you. Back in 2021, I decided to document my entire process of illustrating a comic book. And in this series, I'll be sharing with you some of the insights I've learned along the way. This is a work in progress. The year I could technically officially call myself a professional comic book artist was back in 2001, and that was because that's when I was finally getting paid. My first published work was actually in 1998 when I was just 18. That makes me feel really old. The first lesson you're going to encounter early on in your career is a bit of a hot button topic. The idea of working for exposure or not. It essentially means working for free. I believe there's a bit of a middle ground here somewhere. Early on in my career, the first few comic books that I drew was actually for free. Working with smaller publishers and mostly working with my friends who were also themselves trying to break into the industry. At the time, I figured, what did I have to lose? The idea of getting published was very appealing to me. You know, in this industry, there's this weird thing where nobody wants to hire you if you don't have any experience, but how do you get experience if nobody wants to hire you? The problem with working for free or exposure, I mean, it's essentially the same thing. It opens things up to people who are unsavory and have predatory-like practices. And as artists, we want to try to avoid being taken advantage of. And, you know, there's a long storied history of artists just getting the shaft when it comes to the business end of things. And so it's very, very difficult to definitively answer this because I've benefited from working for free. Because one of my first paid projects actually came out of me going to conventions and being able to hand publishers and editors copies of my artwork as well as printed material. It kind of legitimized me as somebody who had the ability to finish the project and get things done. Now, where it kind of worked in my favor was the fact that when I did get my first job, they asked me, what's your rate? And to be honest, I had no clue what page rates were. I didn't even know the first place to look. So I kind of just made up a number. And this was a case of ignorance somewhat being beneficial. I actually ended up quoting like $25 more than their lowest rate that they probably were going to offer. And luckily they agreed to it. So it's a win, right? Yay. Now, what does this mean for you? I think a couple things. Let's say you were approached by a creator or a publisher whose work that you're familiar with. Now, this is up to you. If you vet them and you feel that these are trustworthy people whose work you're familiar with and has a good publishing track record, then I think it might be worth a shot, even if it's for free, just to get something published. Now, if they're completely coming out of the blue and there's no track record, I would just run away. There's really no point. With that being said, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, I'm kind of the opinion that if you're going to work for exposure and work for free, you might as well do it for yourself. There are so many outlets for you to utilize in order to share your work, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or Webtoons or whatever. Your ability to gain your own audience is probably going to be better in the long run than working for free for a small publisher. I mean, your mileage is going to vary. But if you're asking me and I were young me in today's market, no way, man, no way. I would just create my own stuff, utilize one of the platforms in order to share my work. The worst case scenario is that only a handful of people will see your work. But in the best case scenario, a big publisher might encounter your work and hire you to do work for them for money. Better yet, perhaps the work that you've created has garnered you enough of an audience, thus the exposure that you need isn't really needed because maybe you don't even have to work for one of the big two. You can just continue working for yourself. Here's what it comes down to. If you feel that getting that published material is very important to you, then by all means, I work for free, work for exposure, but I would set limits. I wouldn't spend a year working for free. I wouldn't want to do anything for free for more than a couple weeks. Even a couple weeks seem unreasonable. Don't work for free. But if you do, make sure it's going to get published. Just be careful that you don't get taken advantage of, because early on in your career, this is a space where a lot of that could potentially happen.
All I hear, go get the money. So I go get it. Hate means I do something right. So I'm
okay, so let's say you've made it and you have some stuff published. Now, you're probably going to want to get paid.
Well, I'm happy on my own, making coffee just for one, and eating breakfast all alone. Fewer dishes to
Now,
be
if
done.
you want to talk just really rough numbers, when you're working for an independent company, it can range anywhere from free to, I think you could maybe start from $50 to $100 or something like that, maybe $125 for pencils, maybe inks. I'm not really sure. I haven't been in that arena for a long time, but once you get into the medium to typical big two publishers, the floor should be for pencils around like 125 to 50, maybe 200 if you're inking. Once you get a little bit more notoriety and you have a good publishing track record, that's when you're probably reaching around the 250 to 400 arena. And then, there's the upper echelon, which typically begins around the 400 or 500 mark and up. And that can go up as high as $1,200 to $1,500 a page. It really depends on your, popularity and your track record of selling books. So it's not completely hopeless to work in comics. There is a way to make a good living from it. Now, you would think that this is a pretty simple exchange. You do the work, you get paid. Easy enough. But sometimes it happens and you end up working with the wrong people. Let me just fix this. Okay. Look, a lot of the mistakes that I made was when I was really young. No, that's not true. I'm still making mistakes now. But I remember one of my first gigs was working as an apprentice to this artist doing layouts. The artist was going to then come in and finish it up and do all the cool stuff. And I was kind of doing the storytelling stuff. It was kind of neat because it helped me improve as a storyteller, but I never got paid.
Well, I'm happy on my own, at least most of the time. I guess some of the time, maybe none of the time, I'm happy on my own.
It was an under the table job, and the idea was that he would get paid and then he would pay me, and that last part just never happened. And no ill will, we were all trying to just make it, but it would have been nice to get paid for my work. I want to say that years later, I've learned this lesson and it just never happened again. But you know what? It happened like, I think 2 more times. And I'm almost ashamed to say, but one instance was for a company who was really delinquent in paying. And in order for me to make ends meet, I started doing commissions. It was actually the first time I realized that you could do commissions to get paid. I always thought that the only way to make money off of my art was to work for a publisher. So anyways, the company was going through a rough time. So the money coming in was always being shifted around, and it always felt like whoever complained first would get paid. So, they did pay me, but they were really late and completely inconsistent. And, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the lesson is there other than, go work for only the big two. That's a pretty impractical rule to set for yourself. And, the only thing I would say is that if you're working for a company whose payments are delayed, make sure that you have the ability to work outside of said company in order to make yourself financially secure. In comics, it's not very typical to have some upfront pay, but let's say you're working on a graphic novel, sometimes you'll get an advance in order for you to be able to work on it and have a way to live. These are not very large. They're usually large enough that maybe you can survive like a month or two. They're just a small percentage of the overall budget of what you'll be getting paid. So it could take a long time. My preferred way is I do a page, you pay me, For the most part, the way the exchange goes is you do a page. Usually once you get a batch in, like maybe 5 or 10 pages, you hand that in, fill out a voucher. It's kind of like equivalent to a timesheet. Sometimes when you hand that in at the exact perfect time when they're doing payroll, you can get paid pretty quickly. But sometimes it really just depends on what they're whether it's like net 30 or net 90. Net 90 would be ridiculous. Most companies cut checks every 2 weeks. So if you slide it in maybe at the beginning of the next cycle, you might be waiting a little bit. But if you send that voucher in just as they're about to cut the next checks, then you might get paid a little bit sooner. The lesson here is that in the comic book world, try to work with companies who have reputable reputations. Try to work with companies who have a reputable background in paying creators on time. And eventually, once you've been in this industry long enough, or even in the early stages, you're going to meet other artists, you're going to meet other writers. All of them will have experience with different publishers. You want to create a network or a group of friends who have the ability to warn you if this company sucks or if this company is really good. And you want to surround yourself with people who are trustworthy. Again, as I said, I'd like to think that in my older years, I've become wiser, but I don't know if that's true. You just become a little bit more battle worn. Okay, so you got the job, you're getting paid, make sure you get paid. So now comes the fun part, picking projects. But wait, it's not that easy. Typically, early on in your career, you're not going to get the primo projects. You're probably going to get whatever projects that are available. And early on in my career, it was less about, I want to work on this. It's more, please hire me. I will work on the project that is available. That is typically how you're going to begin your career. Your project is going to be what's available. And you work your way up towards getting to choose your projects. A lot of my earlier opportunities came from my ability to, ironically enough, deliver on time and deliver pretty decent artwork, decent enough in the time that I'm given. So you kind of have to always be ready. You have to be quick enough to accept these projects under pretty crappy circumstance. But these projects lead you to other projects which you get a little bit more time in, such as where I'm at right now. So as your career is progressing and you're basically working on what's available, eventually you're going to garner enough of an audience or a track record, or the audience is responding to your work in a positive way, and opportunities will arise. I know that I've wanted to draw the Flash for a long time, and I remember asking for it for a long time, and I couldn't get it. It was too early in my career at DC, and I just didn't have the cachet to be able to demand such a high profile book. So I worked on smaller books. What's funny is that it was actually because of a failure of a book that I was working on that ironically got me the Flash. I was working on the Legion of Superheroes, and I thought it was going to be a great merging of the old school with the new school and give me the opportunity to learn from a legend and infuse some newer vibes to the book. I was pretty excited at the opportunity to be part of this thing where it's like, hey, if I can help make this book sell, then it would reflect very well on my career. And then the whole thing bombed. The book sold terribly. It was canceled. So I thought, great, I should have gone to Marvel instead. And that's a story for another day.
I don't know where I've been. I don't know where I'm going.
I was feeling pretty low, and I threw out trying to chase commerciality at that point, and I decided to just, as cheesy as it sounds, I decided to just draw from the heart. And there was this, I've always been a big fan of using watercolor and ink wash. I used it for many years in high school, but it was something that didn't feel like it fit in the comic book world. It felt like you had to be a penciler, you had to be an inker, and you had to be a colorist. There was a certain order that these things came in. And a lot of it came from the limitations of the scanning process, but then, when I saw the works of Tim Sale, who's incredible, I saw the work of J.G. Jones, artist who was using gray tones in a way that I wanted to explore. So when I started working on adventure comics, it was the perfect opportunity for me to reintroduce this style that was very suited for the naturalistic farm environment of Connor Kent. The funny thing is that this book was a real breakout for me because in the years before, I felt like I was playing the game of keeping up with the Joneses and trying to make my work very marketable. I was positioning my art in a way that if you needed to fill in for this book, I'm your guy. Now, when I started working on adventure comics, it felt like the way this style was going was a little bit more limiting because it wasn't a case of, oh, he would be perfect to slot into any book, right? I just stopped thinking about that. I just wanted to do ink wash. That's it. I wanted to be able to draw farms. I wanted to be able to draw dogs. I wanted to do these cool tones. So Brian and I had to figure out how to color this new style, which was a whole learning process. That entire experience, unbeknownst to me, would actually lead me to the Flash. Anyways, long story short, I eventually got the book that I wanted, not by pursuing it, but just by pursuing a stylistic choice that I was wanting to explore. And then the book came to me. How does this all translate to you navigating your career in comics and choosing projects? So now let's say you've built up. Now you have the ability to choose. This is my playbook. Your playbook can be completely different. And my playbook could be completely wrong. It could be disastrous for you, or it could be good. Anyways, this works for me, I think. Typically, the way I choose projects is I try to switch it up every other week. So when I was working on The Flash, a very lighthearted, super, your very classic superhero book, I wanted to do something very different afterwards. So naturally, a character like Batman represented a different visual playground for me to inhabit. The approach that I took to that book was pretty different from the way I worked on The Flash. With The Flash, it was very fluid. The panels were all jagged. A lot of the artistic approach that I took on it was very much about fluidity and motion. So the line work was predominantly brushes because it gives off a very smooth and naturalistic look, and it's very dynamic. It had a sense of motion. So when I worked on Batman, which was my next project, I had a very rigid panel design to reflect the rigidity and the control that the character is trying to inhabit. The line work itself, I switched from brushes to Croquill and markers because I wanted to give it a bit of a rougher look. So just to simplify, I like to go from a light project to a dark project, back to a light project. I like to switch it up. I like to switch up genres, right? Which is why I left DC, because I wanted to pursue a completely different type of genre. With this book right now that I'm trying to complete in this vlog or this video, it's a science fiction noir, which is completely different from everything I've done before. But you could see the elements that has come together from all of my past work. But the elements are just being used in a different way. And for my next project after this, it's probably going to be different. So I guess the advice I'm trying to share with you, once you have the ability to choose your own projects, is try to switch it up. Even though you at this point in your career, your style is probably becoming much more definitive of you, you still don't want to be pigeonholed to one specific type of book. You want a publisher to look at you and say, when they come over, it's less of them fitting in and it's more you transforming the book into you, something that is much more genuine to the way that you work, the way that you draw, the way that you tell stories, and something that just feels much more specific and tailored to how you like to produce your work. You know, when it comes to your career in comics, there's going to be an ebb and flow of success and failure. You're going to encounter some not so cool people, and you're going to encounter some great, here's the thing that's really cool about this job. For all its faults, it's opened up so many doors for me that I couldn't even fathom was possible. I remember going to my first international comic book convention in Germany. It blew my mind. It was an incredible experience. The people were amazing, and the fans were so grateful that you showed up. And I was just extremely thankful that people all the way on the other side of the world was reading my work. It still blows my mind that for a job that is you're just sitting around drawing all day would give me such an opportunity to travel and see so much of the world. The people who you're going to meet along the way, you're going to meet some crappy people. You're going to meet some unsavory people. Look, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. I've worked with shitty people. I've worked with great people. It's just part of the learning experience. And I promise you, if you're able to make this all work, it's an incredible job to have. I just submitted the last couple pages of inks, and I have 7 left to go. With the holidays approaching, I'm going to lose some days, and there's nothing I can do except keep trucking along. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure I'm going to make this deadline.